The first thing I noticed wasn't the paperwork. It was my daughter's voice. Cold. Flat. Impatient. Mom, just sign the papers. Not please. Not are you okay? Not even did you read it? Just sign. Like I was an inconvenience standing between her and something she already considered hers. The conference room smelled like expensive coffee and polished wood. Everything in that bank looked designed to make people feel small. Soft leather chairs. Quiet lighting. Men in tailored suits pretending not to listen while listening to everything. And my daughter Simone sat across from me in a cream-colored designer blazer, tapping her manicured nails against the table like my hesitation embarrassed her. Mother, she sighed, lowering her voice the way people do when they think they're being patient with old people. We already explained everything. Her husband Derek leaned back beside her, smiling that fake church smile he used whenever he wanted to look trustworthy. It's just a transfer, he said smoothly. Temporary protection for the assets. Assets. That was the word they used instead of home. Instead of the house I worked 32 years to pay off. Instead of the property my late husband nearly died building with his own hands. Assets. I looked down at the stack of papers again. My reading glasses suddenly felt too weak. Too blurry. Too slow. And that's when the banker leaned toward me slightly. Not enough for Simone to notice. Not enough for Derek to stop smiling. Just enough for me to hear him whisper. Ma'am, his voice tightened. Do not sign those papers. Everything inside me went still. Not scared. Still. Because deep down, I think I already knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to believe my own daughter could do it to me. And the worst part? Simone smiled when she saw my hand shaking. Smiled. Like she thought fear meant obedience. Like she had already won. I looked at her then. Really looked at her. The same little girl who used to sleep on my chest during thunderstorms. The same child I worked double shifts for after her father died. The same girl who once cried because another kid at school said we were poor. And suddenly I remembered something painful. Simone had always hated looking poor more than she hated being cruel. That realization hit me harder than the betrayal itself. Because cruelty from strangers feels different. Cruelty from your child? That changes the temperature of your soul. Mom, Simone said carefully now. Why are you staring at me like that? I didn't answer. The banker quietly slid a pen away from my reach. Tiny movement. But it changed everything. Derek noticed. And for the first time since we sat down, his expression cracked. Just for a second. But I caught it. Because people underestimate quiet women. They think silence means ignorance. They think calm means weak. What they never understand is this. Some women get quiet because they're afraid. And some women get quiet because they're thinking. I was thinking. Fast. Painfully fast. Because suddenly all the strange little moments over the last year started lining up in my mind like dominoes. The sudden interest in my finances. The pressure to simplify my estate. The constant comments about my age. The way Simone kept saying things like, you shouldn't stress yourself with all this responsibility anymore. Responsibility. That's another word people use when they want ownership. I swallowed slowly. Can I ask a question? I said softly. Simone exhaled dramatically. Mom. No, I said calmly. I'd like an answer first. The room shifted. Not loudly. Emotionally. Derek straightened in his seat. The banker lowered his eyes to his tablet, pretending not to listen. I looked directly at my daughter. If this is temporary, I asked, why does it say irreversible transfer of primary ownership? Silence. Tiny silence. But it was enough. Simone recovered first. Oh my God, she laughed nervously. That's just legal wording. Legal wording. Funny how people always hide evil inside technical language. I turned toward the banker. Is that true? His jaw tightened. And that was when Simone snapped. Mom, why are you interrogating everybody? This is exactly why we're trying to help you. You don't understand these documents. There it was. The humiliation. Public. Sharp. Intentional. The old woman. The confused mother. The burden. And what hurt wasn't just the disrespect. It was how rehearsed it sounded. Like they'd practiced this conversation before bringing me there. like I was the final obstacle in a plan already built around my silence. I nodded slowly. I see. Simone mistook that for surrender immediately. I watched relief flood her face. Derek relaxed too fast. That's the thing about greedy people. They get comfortable the second they think they've won. But something inside me had changed now. Because once trust cracks, observation becomes sharper. And suddenly I was seeing everything. The way Derek kept controlling the conversation. The way Simone avoided eye contact whenever I mentioned ownership. The way the banker looked physically uncomfortable. The way my daughter never once asked what I wanted. Not once. Just sign. Just comply. Just disappear quietly. It's amazing how quickly children can become strangers when money enters the room. I folded my hands carefully. You know, I said softly. Your father used to say real class is how people treat someone they no longer need. Derek forced a laugh. That's deep. No, I said. It's revealing. Simone's face hardened instantly. That little mask slipped again. And for the first time I saw not my daughter, but a woman terrified I might ruin something she already spent in her head. Mother, she said quietly, we're only trying to protect the family. Family. People say that word right before betrayal more than they say it before love. I leaned back slowly, and the banker finally spoke clearly. Mrs. Bennett, he said carefully, I strongly recommend you have independent counsel review these documents before signing. Simone whipped around so fast her chair squeaked. Excuse me. The banker stayed calm. Professional calm. But I noticed sweat near his temple. That is standard recommendation, he replied evenly. No, Derek cut in sharply. What standard is respecting the client's wishes? Client. Interesting word. Because suddenly they weren't talking about me like family anymore either. Now I was a transaction. And somehow that hurt less. Maybe because the truth had finally entered the room. Simone stared at me. Then her voice softened instantly. Too instantly. Manipulation switching tactics. Mom, she whispered, eyes glossy now. Why are you doing this to us? To us. There it was again. The emotional reversal. Make the victim feel guilty. I almost admired how smooth she'd become at it. Almost. I'm asking questions, I said calmly. And embarrassing us, she snapped. The room froze again. Because there it was. The real concern. Not my safety. Not my future. Embarrassment. Appearances. Status. Simone always cared about appearances more than peace. Even as a little girl. I remember once, back when we lived in that tiny apartment after Harold died, she refused to invite friends over because the furniture didn't match. She was 13. I worked 16-hour shifts at the hospital then. Came home with swollen feet and exhaustion buried inside my bones. But I still saved enough to buy her the prom dress she wanted because I never wanted my daughter to feel less than anyone else. Funny thing about overcompensating for your children's pain. Sometimes they grow up believing comfort is something they deserve from everyone around them, even at your expense. Especially at your expense. Derek leaned forward now, lowering his voice. Ms. Bennett, he said, suddenly formal. This hesitation could complicate tax protection significantly. Fear tactics. Pressure. Urgency. Classic. But what fascinated me most was this. Neither of them asked why I felt uncomfortable. Because they didn't care. They just needed compliance before I became difficult. And that's when something else clicked in my mind. The rushed timeline. The repeated calls. The way Simone insisted we meet today specifically. I looked at the banker again. Is there a deadline on this transfer? Before he could answer, Derek interrupted. Technically, yes. Technically. Another dangerous word. The banker finally spoke carefully. There are no immediate penalties for delaying review. And there it was. The lie exposed quietly. I watched panic flash through Simone's eyes. Small. But visible. My daughter had forgotten something important about me. I spent 30 years as a charge nurse in emergency care. I know what panic looks like. I know what guilt looks like. And I definitely know what people look like when they're trying to control a situation that's slipping away. Mom, Simone said, reaching for my hand now, please trust me. That almost broke me. Not because it was sincere. Because it wasn't. And mothers know when their children are performing. That's the tragedy nobody talks about. We know. We always know. We just pray we're wrong. I pulled my hand back gently. I do trust you, I said quietly. Her shoulders loosened. Then I finished. I just don't trust what you're becoming. The silence after that felt expensive. Heavy. Derek looked furious now. Simone looked wounded. But not guilty. Wounded people cry differently than guilty people. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. My daughter genuinely believed she deserved what she was trying to take. That's what greed does eventually. It rewrites morality. You're being dramatic, Derek muttered. No, I replied calmly. I'm being careful. He scoffed. And that's when the banker quietly slid another document toward me. Not the transfer papers. Property valuation. I looked down, and my stomach dropped, because the property was worth over $6 million now. 6.2 to be exact. The lakefront area had exploded in value over the past decade. I looked up slowly. Simone avoided my eyes. Derek didn't. He stared directly at me. And in that moment I finally saw the truth. This wasn't protection. This wasn't family planning. This wasn't concern. This was acquisition. And they thought age had made me soft enough to surrender quietly. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny. Because betrayal becomes absurd when it finally removes its mask. You knew, I whispered. Simone's face tightened. Mom. You knew this whole time. Derek stepped in immediately. Everyone knew property values were increasing. No, I said softly. Not everyone tried to steal it. That word landed like broken glass. Steal. Simone stood up immediately. Oh my God. This is unbelievable. Isn't it interesting how guilty people become offended first? How dare you accuse us after everything we do for you? Everything. I hate that word when manipulative people use it. Everything usually means things nobody asked them to do. I stayed calm, which made Simone angrier. Because emotional people hate composure when they're trying to provoke guilt. You moved me closer to you, I said carefully. You insisted on managing my appointments. You pushed me to retire early. You discouraged me from speaking to my old financial advisor. The room got very quiet, because patterns sound terrifying once spoken out loud. Derek's voice sharpened. You're twisting things. No, I replied. I'm finally untangling them. And suddenly Simone exploded. Not tears. Not sadness. Anger. Real anger. You know what? She snapped. Fine. Yes, we're trying to secure the property. Because unlike you, we actually understand wealth. There it was. The truth. Ugly. Raw. Finally honest. You're sitting on millions while acting like some humble saint, she continued. Do you know how insane that is? The banker looked horrified now. But Simone kept going. You live beneath your means like struggle is some badge of honor. Meanwhile, Derek and I are trying to build something. I stared at her quietly. And underneath all that anger, I heard something else. Resentment. Years of it. Because real wealth terrifies people obsessed with appearances. Especially quiet wealth. The kind that doesn't need validation. The kind that doesn't perform. Simone had spent years chasing the image of status while resenting the woman who actually possessed security. You think class is labels in gated communities, I said softly. And you think suffering makes you noble, she shot back. No, I replied. I think dignity matters more than display. Derek stood abruptly. We're done here. Yes, I said calmly. We are. And then came the moment they never expected. I stood too. Slowly. Steadily. No shaking now. No confusion. No fear. And I reached into my purse. Derek's confidence faded first. Because confident predators panic when prey stops behaving frightened. I pulled out my phone. Then another folder. Thicker than theirs. The banker blinked. Simone frowned. What is that? I looked directly at her. My attorney advised me to bring it. The color drained from Derek's face instantly. And suddenly the entire room changed sides. Emotionally. Psychologically. Powerfully. You have an attorney? Simone asked quietly. I almost pitted her. Almost. You thought I built a $6 million estate by accident? Silence. Pure silence. I opened the folder calmly. 3 months ago, I continued. My attorney noticed unusual attempts to access ownership structures tied to my property. Derek stopped breathing normally. Tiny detail. But I saw it. And after that, I said, we began documenting everything. Simone looked at Derek immediately. Not me. Him. That told me everything. The banker sat completely still now. I continued carefully. You pushed for power of attorney twice. No response. You attempted to position yourselves as primary trustees. Still nothing. You pressured me repeatedly to transfer controlling ownership. Simone finally whispered, Mom. But it was too late for softness now. Too late for daughter. Too late for family performance. I opened another document. And according to this investigation, I said quietly, Derek also leveraged projected ownership of my estate during private investment negotiations. The banker's eyes widened immediately. There it was. The hidden pressure. Debt. Risk. Need. Derek lunged emotionally before physically. That's out of context. No, I replied calmly. It's desperation. Simone looked physically sick now. You investigated us? No, I said softly. I protected myself. Big difference. Huge difference. And suddenly my daughter looked very young again. Not innocent. Just immature. Like a child who thought manipulation was intelligence until consequences arrived. Tears finally filled her eyes. Real ones this time. You think I'd steal from you? I held her gaze for a long moment, then answered honestly. I think you convinced yourself it wasn't stealing because I'm your mother. That hit harder than yelling ever could. Because truth delivered calmly cuts deeper. The banker cleared his throat carefully. I believe this meeting should conclude. Derek grabbed the papers aggressively, but his hands were shaking now. Good. Let him feel unstable for once. You set us up, he muttered. No, I replied. You revealed yourselves. And that's the thing about character. Pressure doesn't create it. Pressure exposes it. Simone suddenly broke down. I was trying to secure our future. Our future. I asked quietly. By taking mine? She cried harder. But I noticed something painful. She still wasn't apologizing for the betrayal. Only the outcome. That's how you know someone hasn't fully changed yet. Consequences are not the same as remorse. I gathered my purse slowly. And before leaving, I looked directly at Derek. You chased wealth so hard, I said calmly. You never learned the difference between ownership and entitlement. Then I turned to Simone. And you confused access with inheritance. Neither of them spoke. Because sometimes the most devastating thing a person can hear is the truth they already suspected about themselves. I walked out of that bank feeling strangely light. Not happy. Not yet. But awake. An awakening after betrayal is painful. You start replaying years differently. Phone calls. Conversations. Holiday dinners. Little comments. You realize disrespect rarely begins loudly. It begins in tiny permissions. Tiny silences. Tiny moments where people learn they can diminish you without consequence. Outside the bank, the air felt colder. Cleaner too. A valet brought my car around, but before I got in, the banker came outside. Still nervous. Still careful. Mrs. Bennett? I turned. He lowered his voice. I'm sorry. Interesting thing to say. For what? I asked. For realizing too late what was happening. I studied him quietly. You still warned me. He nodded once. Then said something I'll never forget. Real predators look for good people with boundaries weakened by love. That sat in my chest for days afterward. Because he was right. Love had weakened my boundaries. Motherhood had convinced me endurance was virtue. But suffering silently for disrespect doesn't make you loving. Sometimes it just teaches people you'll tolerate pain. A week later, Simone came to my house alone. No designer blazer. No polished attitude. No Derek. Just swollen eyes and exhaustion. I let her in. Not because everything was forgiven. Because peace requires clarity before distance. She sat at my kitchen table staring at the same floral curtain she grew up with. I left him, she whispered. I said nothing. He had debt, she admitted shakily. A lot of it. There it was. The full truth finally arriving. He kept saying your property would solve everything. I closed my eyes briefly. Not from shock. From grief. Because manipulation spreads like smoke inside relationships. He said you owed us help, she continued quietly. That family wealth should move downward. And what did you think? I asked. Long silence. Then tears. I think I got addicted to looking successful. That honesty mattered more than crying. I was embarrassed growing up poor, she whispered. And when we finally started getting access to wealthy people, I didn't want to lose it. Access. Again. Not peace. Not love. Access. I sat across from her quietly. You know what real wealth is? I asked softly. She shook her head. Being able to sleep peacefully. She cried harder after that. Because exhausted people understand peace immediately. We talked for hours that night. Not dramatically. Honestly. About insecurity. Status. Shame. Grief. About how children sometimes resent the parents who sacrificed visibly because visible sacrifice reminds them where they came from. And near midnight, Simone finally whispered the words I'd waited for. I became cruel to you. Simple. Direct. True. I nodded. Yes. No rescuing. No softening. People cannot heal from truths constantly diluted for their comfort. Months passed after that. Slowly, carefully, Simone started rebuilding herself. Therapy. Work. Distance from Derek. Accountability changes people when they truly choose it. Not instantly, but steadily. And me? I changed too. I stopped apologizing for boundaries. Stopped confusing silence with grace. Stopped believing motherhood required self-erasure. One afternoon, I was sitting in a salon chair while Miss Claudine braided my hair when she suddenly said, "You look lighter." I smiled. Do I? Jim, she nodded knowingly. Some burdens wear lipstick and call you family. I laughed so hard I nearly cried. Because wisdom really does live in ordinary places. Beauty shops. Church kitchens. Taxi rides. Hospital waiting rooms. The world is full of people who understand survival quietly. That's where real class lives anyway. Not country clubs. Not fake smiles over champagne. Real class is emotional integrity. How gently you handle people weaker than you. How honestly you move when nobody's watching. How peacefully you sleep at night. About a year later, Simone invited me to dinner. Small restaurant. No performance. No pretending. Halfway through the meal, she looked at me carefully. Do you think you'll ever fully trust me again? That was the hardest question of all. Because forgiveness and trust are not twins. I reached for my water slowly. Then answered truthfully. I think trust grows where honesty stays consistent. She nodded. No defensiveness. That mattered. Then she surprised me. You know what hurts most? What? I really thought sophistication meant looking expensive. I smiled sadly. A lot of people think that. But you never did. No, I said softly. Because I've cleaned hospital floors beside women with more dignity than millionaires. She stared at me for a long moment after that. And for the first time in years she looked peaceful. Not impressive. Not polished. Peaceful. There's a difference. Huge one. Today the property is still mine. Not because I worship ownership. Because protecting your dignity matters. Especially when people mistake your kindness for surrender. And sometimes I still think about that banker. That tiny whisper. Don't do it. Amazing how one honest moment can interrupt an entire disaster. But maybe the real lesson wasn't about money at all. Maybe it was this. The people who truly love you will never pressure you to abandon your peace for their comfort. Never. And if they do, listen carefully. Because manipulation gets loud right before control slips away. So now I want to ask you something. What would you have done in my position? Would you have forgiven Simone? Do you think family deserves second chances after betrayal like that? And where are you watching from tonight? I read your comments all the time. And honestly, some of your stories are even more powerful than mine. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe and spend a little more time here with us. There's always another story waiting. And sometimes, those stories heal parts of us we didn't even realize were hurting.